This is The Trend, where you'll be getting an enlightened perspective of trending news and topics with amazing commentary. And we are back with another episode for the podcast and different segments for the YouTube channel, of course. And we're going to be talking about the main segment. Well, it's going to be talking about What is a Woman? A documentary by Matt Walsh and the Daily Wire. And I watched the entire thing and got some very interesting information from that documentary. And we're going to talk about it and talk about some of the feedback regarding the documentary and the perception of the documentary as well, and some of the things I learned, of course. Before we go into that, before we go into the What is a Woman documentary, some brief news so people can get in touch with what's going on today in our society. First things, of course, is a little basketball news. If you guys are following the NBA, Steph Curry had one of the best finals performances in NBA history, playing against the Boston Celtics with a 43-point performance, and did an amazing job. Just wanted to shout out Steph Curry. You feel me? Next bit of news is Justin Bieber. If you guys have not been following the news regarding Justin Bieber, he has canceled a lot of the shows as of recently because he was diagnosed with a virus that paralyzes half of his face. So he won't be performing for a while. Don't know when he will get better, but shout out to Justin Bieber if you guys were not aware. Pretty serious condition, to be honest. Next, of course, is the situation that's probably going to be very intertwined with our main segment, is the fact that there was a incident recently where teachers are starting to take students and kids to drag shows. Matter of fact, there was an incident specifically of a father going to the school board because one of the teachers took his 16-year-old son to a drag show, and he was sat next to a convicted pedophile who was a registered sexual sex offender. So very bad situation. They did nothing about that circumstance, and it's kind of something that is not good, but it seems like it's getting a little traction for people just taking these kids and showing them drag shows like it's an okay thing to do. Very sus. And of course, the last news I'm going to talk about before we dive into the main segment, again, to get you quick fire news, so to speak, is the situation regarding the Uvalde police. You know, the Uvalde mass shooting, what makes this different from other mass shootings, of course, that are all very bad, they're all very serious, is the fact that the police department there was not kind of combating the assailant that went inside the school. Most situations like this never have circumstances like this, and people are using this one circumstance to say, please don't do anything. Although that's stupid, in reality, regardless, it was a very weird situation for the police department. So I was holding off my opinions until we got more information, and we do have more information. So the chief of the police department, a few things that he did note that I wrote down. He said that he didn't have his radio because he thought it would slow him down when he was heading over towards the incident, which apparently was like a 70-ish minute drive, something like that, or something regarding that aspect. So he didn't take his radios because of that, because they could slow him down because the radios are very clunky and big, apparently. A few other things that was noted is that he couldn't get into the building because he didn't have the right key to go into the locked doors, apparently. He said that he did not tell the officers to stand down. He also noted that the classroom, well, let me kind of go into that a little deeper. He said that he didn't tell the officers to stand down, and apparently there's a news from the New York Times and some other news outlets as of right now, indicating that he said officers stand down, stopping them from going after the school shooter. So apparently he did not say that from his words. A few other things he's noted is that the classroom that he was trying to get into had a steel jam that could not be forced open. He said that in the meantime, while they were finding the key to open the door, he focused on evacuating other students from other classrooms. And he said that other tactics that they would have done in terms of getting these students out would be dangerous. Now, that's a bunch of stuff that he said. There was more stuff, but some of these things, there were a few things that I highlighted, some of the words that came out of his mouth. He also noted that he actually did not know he was in charge, apparently, which was very interesting, right? And an FBI agent who's an expert in mass shootings noted that hey, that is false, that in terms of police procedure, what you did is not normal standard. What the standard is supposed to be is officers are supposed to do whatever it takes to engage the assailant and take him out. That's what an FBI agent said. And kind of another thing, like I'm stumbling on my words because there's a lot of different factors and a lot of different things that are being noted in this situation, is that there is a report, or there's a video of one of the mothers who was the mother of one of the students there. She was trying to get into the building, and the cops were constantly stopping her. And she said that she had to jump over a fence, and then the police were chasing after her. And she got into the building, saved her kid, and saved one of the friends of her kid, and got out safely. And she said that, media outlets were supposed to talk to her, but apparently she was threatened by the police department to not say anything. And because of that, she was scared because she was told that she may get jailed and deported from the country. Fortunately, she talked to a judge saying that that would never happen, and eventually a media outlet was eventually able to talk to her, and her news got on like social media and TikTok. So a lot of interesting information. One thing I'm going to say in regards to my kind of unbiased opinion regarding the situation. Obviously, I've said many a times, any mass shooting is very unfortunate, and it's a horrible thing. The person who did it is a horrible human being, right? In terms of the different perspectives of what is going on here, everything the police chief said personally seems like excuses in my personal opinion. Now, I said prior that I've been in the military. I know there's procedure. I know there's specific ways that things need to be done. However, I don't have a strict opinion on this situation because I do not know what exactly happened regarding the officers. Now, the explanation that was given from the police chief, I think, was a poor explanation and made no sense. And I think that is a tribute to how undisciplined the police department is a lot of times. The excuse of not having the radios, the protocol that you did attribute when you were there, all of that seems like excuses. The FBI agent said those were basically excuses, and we even had a mother who had to do whatever it takes to save her kids. She said the police department said that they would arrest her. It's he say, she say. I'm not all about hearsay, but regardless if that's true or not, it's still a very suspect situation for the police department. So I look at everything in terms of the facts, and I look at everything in terms of what I do think is right versus wrong. Like I said, 70% logic, 25% emotion. In regards to the situation, the police department seemed like they handled this poorly. And I think that is from the information given, I think a lot of people can agree to that. Okay, I'm not going to give excuses for the police department if they do something bad. If they do something bad, they should be accounted for it, and they should be held accountable. Now, what I'm not going to do, that a lot of people that are very anti-police are going to do, is saying, see, even if a police department was at a mass shooting, they wouldn't do anything. That's what you're not going to do, because this is an exception, not the rule. A lot of people like to do that. It's very idiotic. But regardless, this police department specifically did a horrible job in regarding to the situation, and they deserve an F if you had to give a grade. Like, definitely someone needs to be held accountable for what happened. Okay. So those are my final thoughts in regards to that situation from the new information we got. So time to dive into What is a Woman? A documentary, as I said, to reiterate, by Matt Walsh and the Daily Wire. Now, there's a lot of information. The documentary itself was about an hour and a half long plus, and I watched everything. I jot down a lot of information, and there's a few things that I agree with, some things that I disagree with, but we're going to talk about all of it, give it an honest review. Now, before we even dive into the content itself, some of the things that I heard in terms of the backlash that came after What is a Woman was very notable and should be stated in regards to the people who were on the other side, right? So apparently, in terms of the airing of What is a Woman documentary, when it aired, there was an apparent cyber attack to try to prevent people watching the documentary. A cyber attack to prevent people to learn anything from the documentary. And one of the things that I'm going to point out in regards to that is censorship. You trying to prevent people to see information is censorship, and that's a horrible thing. I don't care if you're from the far left or far right. If you try to censor people what they can or cannot watch on their own free time in terms of trying to gain more knowledge about any particular topic, that is censorship, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And I don't want not hear anything in regards to that situation that tries to defend a cyber attack on someone trying to watch something. That is censorship. I'm not with that. Some other things apparently that I saw from the videos of Matt Walsh is he tried to give this video to, or give this documentary to different critics so they can review it. Keep in mind, this is on Rotten Tomatoes. Apparently, it was one of the most successful documentaries on the Daily Wire, one of the more successful documentary as of recent years. Apparently, it scored very well on Rotten Tomatoes in terms of fan voting. But apparently, when he sent this out to critics, or one of their critic people sending it out to critics, there was a lot of backlash. There was a lot of people saying, calling them transphobic, calling them racist or whatever, and saying, take me off your email list, saying I refuse to watch it. So a lot of people whose jobs are to watch and criticize and critique different film refuse to watch a film. Doesn't that seem a little weird to you? That's like you being a food critic and you decide to go next to a restaurant and you look at the restaurant, say, I don't like this restaurant, and decide to not critique that restaurant, and that restaurant gets left out with a criticism critique in terms of its overall popularity or something like that, right? It just doesn't make sense considering that is your job, especially if this one documentary gets more and more popular and becomes extremely popular, but there's no professional criticisms from a film critic, right? I've always been iffy about film critics, but this just seems backwards. It just seems backwards, and it doesn't really make any sense to me personally. Apparently, Matt Walsh got a lot of death threats too regarding the film, which is also horrible. Anybody who gets death threats for creating a piece of media definitely is not a good person. You regard people. Imagine this, right? Someone creates a film. You don't agree with the film and the idea of the film. Fine, don't watch it. Fine. But you go out of your way to try to kill or send death threats to the person who created the film. Like, it's not like it's some crazy dark web type of situation. It's just a film where the guy asks questions and tries to get answers to specific questions. It's not like some of the crazy stuff you may find on the dark web. But people are trying to kill the guy for it. You're worse than the guy who made the film. If you think he's bad, you're worse than him. It blows me in terms of the hypocrisy. And I'm not even saying I agree with everything that's saying in the film, but regardless, in terms of the hypocrisy, it's ridiculous. Now, the film itself, I watched it. It was very interesting considering there's a lot of back and forth, and so a few things that I could say about it that was very, accepting in my personal opinion is that Matt Walsh, for the most part, considering his normal personality, was very calm, was trying to understand. He wasn't trying to be aggressive. He wasn't trying to be, witty, be a smartass or anything like that. He was asking legitimate questions to legitimate problems in this area that he's referring to. And people, obviously, they didn't answer a lot of his questions. Regardless, his performance in it was not negative. There's a reason why people accepted the interview and engaged in the interview. It wasn't until they got questions that they didn't agree with where people started getting hostile. But the tone, the mannerisms themselves were perfectly appropriate and professional. So I'll give him credit regarding that. I don't really watch many documentaries, so I can't really criticize or critique this compared to other documentaries. But regardless, the information was very informative. The performance from Matt Walsh was very interesting, and the flow of the film, from what I saw, flowed very, very well. Although I did wish you can get more perspectives from different people that wasn't either a feminist or someone who got into the field. You got one perspective from someone who dove into this general controversy, and we'll talk about each interview. We'll talk about each one of them, but I wish you got a little bit more kind of perspectives from that, right? Although you did get a lot of random people on the streets and see their perspective, and we'll talk about those people as well. But I feel like you could have done a little bit more in regards to that. But regardless, that's just a small nitpicky thing. Regardless, I think you did a lot of very interesting things in this film. So those are my kind of thoughts in regards to the flow of the film, overall film, the semantics and the structure of the film itself, the feedback of the film and before and after it was created, and my disagreements and the atrocity is a strong word, but a lot of these people are horrible people for what they did. Regardless, I don't care who you are, I don't care what your stance is. Anytime you commit the actions that these people committed, you're not a good person. That's point blank, period. Okay. All right, so let's dive into some of the interviews and the content itself. Okay, this is what you were waiting for. I'm very aware. If you watch the film What is a Woman, you realize that most of the content comes from different interviews, from different perspectives in regards to the transgenderism issue, or transgenderism situation in America as a whole. And I'm going to give my personal opinions about it later on, but we're going to focus on the content and what was told. Now, the first interview was with a therapist, and I believe she was a trans man, although she didn't state it, because later on in the interview, he asked her, what is a woman? And she said she didn't know because she wasn't a woman, or he wasn't a woman. So I believe that was a trans man, and there wasn't really that much substance regarding that conversation. Much of it was kind of therapist, circular logic conversations, just stuff like that. A lot of circular logic happened. Keep in mind, when people have like debates and arguments with people, there's a lot of times where people would use very fancy words and beautify or romanticize the language that they are saying to try to make a point. But in regards, if you really understand what the words are saying and the meaning behind the words themselves, you realize a lot of the times these people aren't saying anything. They're just taking you for a merry-go-round for the most part without answering the question. It's a tactic that is very manipulative, and I try not to do that in my own speech. Although I do use like big words, I try to be as understandable as possible when I'm speaking. Try to say very layman terms, but certain times there's words that people won't use on the general public that you may not hear often, but those words are the most appropriate for the thing that I'm trying to input to you in that given situation. Okay. A lot of people do the circular merry-go-round logic. It's super annoying, and they don't say anything. Okay. Now, the next interview was with a world-renowned gender transition surgeon who is a trans woman, so she has experience with the entire process and procedure, of course. And a lot of interesting things were said. Although I do want to point out, in terms of these interviews, one very interesting aspect that he does is he goes back and forth on a lot of different points. So he would address a specific point, have this person answer, and then go to another interview and see their answers for the same question. So for me personally, I'm just going to go through each interview. I'm not going to go through the flow of the story, but I'm going to go through each interview and talk about what they said and my own thoughts about that, of course. Now, one very interesting thing that was brought up to the surgeon that Matt Walsh brought up is her feelings about trans-abled people. Now, this is a relatively new phenomenon that has been going on, where people who are identifying as being disabled, they are born, they identified as being either blind, handicapped, etc., and they want to do physical harm to their bodies in order to be disabled. Now, due to our current cultures, for the most part, people are allowing them to do this. Scientists, therapists, psychologists are allowing them to either blind themselves, cut off their limb, etc., to fulfill that want to be transabled, right? This is a new phenomenon, and I'm not joking. A few other phenomena that has been coming out recently: transracialism. This is the aspect of people who are born a specific race and that they feel out of their body and they want to transition to a different race. There is an example of this white guy who transitioned to be looking more like he's Korean. Okay. And then the last one is trans species. This is a situation where people identify as an animal and they want to change who they are to identify more and more as an animal. Okay, these three terms, if you would have told somebody about this about 5-10 years ago, you would have been looked at pretty much insane. Arguably, they still would be looked at as insane. But these three things and more trans situations are becoming more and more accepted in society, and it makes you think, how far is this going to go until we do something about it, right? If you want to be the person that says, "Oh, live your life," fine. But a big premise that's featured in this film, and for me personally, is that the youth, the kids, confusing them with stuff like this is very, very bad. If you're an adult, I don't give a damn what you do personally, but if these are kids, they don't know better. They're very impressionable. In terms of manipulation, in terms of like raising kids, you can make them turn out however you want. They're like a blank canvas. You can mold them however you want. They don't know what they're talking about half the time. It takes a long time for them to process to understand the world, right? So I'm saying any of these situations do not afflict these upon kids. And I'll be consistent with that as we continue. But if you're an adult, I don't give a damn. I just don't care. I just don't. All right. So another thing that was kind of put out. When Matt Walsh pointed out the trans ableism of people in our society, the surgeon replied saying these people have a mental disorder, and she said these people are kooky. You heard me right. Trans-able people, the surgeon said, have mental disorders and are kooky. Very interesting, right? Very interesting. Very interesting. Even though gender dysphoria is diagnosed a mental disorder, but very interesting, because Matt Walsh did ask, you don't see any similarities between trans ableism and transgenderism, and the surgeon said nope, not one. You can't at least admit that gender dysphoria is a mental illness, which it is. Very interesting. A few other things that was brought up in this conversation. There's a quote saying, a woman is a combination of your physical attributes and the gender clues you give. Now, this is the definition that this surgeon gave when Matt Walsh asked, what is a woman? He asked this question to each and every interview to get their feedback. And this is the definition given to him by the surgeon. A woman is a combination of your physical attributes. So you had to have a certain amount of physical attributes and the gender clues you were given. Now, one thing that is very interesting here, you say physical attributes. So that means that if at any point you change your physical attributes and then your general personality attributes a certain way, you can identify as whatever you want. That is the problem with this definition. But we can keep on moving. They also said the youngest person that they committed surgery on was age 16. And that the surgeon also noted that minors are able to make decisions. Okay. I am always going to call out BS whether or not, whether or not it's a leftist agenda or a right agenda. Like I said, I'm moderate for the most part, but I'm going to call out things that I think is very odd and don't really make any sense. But yeah, those are some of the things that the surgeon was saying. For the most part, it was a pretty standard interview. There wasn't really any hostility. Honestly, I can tell there's some disagreements on certain aspects of the interview itself, but I do think that the surgeon was being disingenuous, especially when certain things were brought up. A few other things that the surgeon was saying throughout the film was that there is little to no conflict in regards to the issues that being transgender has on like sports or like society as a whole, in terms of like bathrooms and all that stuff. So I feel like the surgeon was being a little disingenuous, but we move. The second interview was with someone known as Don Sukar, I believe. He owns like a comic book-ish store, I believe. I don't really know exactly what type of store he owns, but the reason why he was interviewed is there's a viral situation regarding him and I believe a congressperson. I'm not really sure, but the person was a trans woman. and he was having a whole argument saying, not agreeing with the premise that this trans woman was a woman and calling her a man. And he also had a sign in regards to, like, if you have a dick, you were a man, basically. So a little bit of a controversy. It went viral. A lot of people were talking about it, and Matt Walsh started to interview him. He didn't really have any insight, obviously, because he wasn't like a biologist or anything. He had a very straightforward opinion. He was a man because he had a dick and balls. That's basically the whole premise of that entire interview. So very interesting. One thing he also noticed is, I don't give a shit about your feelings. Now, I'm an advocate of 75% logic, 25% emotion. I'll consider your feelings, but I'm not going to use that as any weight in terms of stuff that I do personally, right? I try to stay to the facts. If I'm proven wrong, I'm proven wrong, but we move. Next interview was with a pediatrician. This is probably the most talked about interview, I'm guessing, considering some of the things that was said, and it was very weird in a sense. Okay, so the pediatrician obviously is a child doctor, and she's been doing it for a while now, and it was a pretty interesting interview nonetheless. So this interview definitely went in a lot more depth compared to a lot of the other interviews, because this is a pediatrician. She works with kids. She's been working with kids like 20 something years, and she's been telling these kids a very certain amount of things when she's been with the kids, and she has kids of her own. So there's a lot more depth with this conversation, considering her experience with kids as they grow up, because that's the crux of the video, I believe, and my personal view is the agenda pushing to the kids, that I have big problems with it, no matter what you're trying to talk about it. So first thing that was very interesting that was noted from the pediatrician is that she said telling a family because of that little penis he's male identified is not correct. So the doctor is not correct saying this is a male because he has a penis. Yeah, I had the same expression on my face when I heard that quote. I'm like, wait, what? What? I don't even understand what you're trying to say there. So that was the first day. I don't think I need to dive into that deeper, because it's such a weird statement. She also noted the comfortability she has discussing gender identity with kids. There's a recent law that was passed in Florida, I believe, in regards to teachers not being able to teach gender identity and gender ideology to kids for a reason, because that's not their place to teach kids about this type of stuff. If the parents want to do it, albeit, although I disagree, but I can't tell a parent what they want to teach their kids. I mean, there's very little thing I can do about that. But in terms of a public institution, in terms of the doctor they're going to instill types of ideologies and philosophies to these kids is inappropriate. You can't instill your own personal beliefs to these kids. That's not your job. That is not what you're assigned to do. It isn't, right? So she thinks it's perfectly okay to kind of really dive into these questions, and at any point, from what it sounded like, any point where this kid says I'm a girl or a boy, or I'm feminine or masculine, or any sort of situation like that, the pediatrician dives into that way too deep to say, oh, well, you are that. So she's saying you can't identify as a male, but the moment you identify as the other one, then that's what you are. Like, these kids are kids. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they want with their lives. That's the point of experience and development. So I found that extremely weird. Now the what funny part was going on is he asked about Santa Claus, right? In terms of does Santa Claus exist? He used this as an example to kind of defend against the idea that kids can choose their own gender identity. So Matt Walsh brought up Santa Claus. The idea behind bringing them up is saying that the kids believe in Santa Claus. So the kids believe in Santa Claus, which is a fictional being that does not exist. How can the kid also choose with certainty what identity they are? Now, what made this hilarious is that the pediatrician did not answer the question of whether or not Santa Claus existed. When he asked, "Does Santa Claus exist?" he says, "This is what the pediatrician said. Well, if the kid believes that the Santa Claus exists." As I said, the pediatrician plays this circular logic where she does not outright answer the question that was given to her by Matt Walsh about Santa Claus because she doesn't want to concede defeat. Very apparent. It is extremely apparent if you're watching the film, okay? Another thing that she did say is that male gametes doesn't make you a man. Do you know what male gametes are? Male gametes is sperm. Apparently, sperm doesn't make you a man. Having sperm. Very interesting. As I said, there's very interesting quotes that was said in this specific interview with this pediatrician. And, oh man, this was absolutely hilarious. Where she said, "We assume chickens are females because they lay eggs." And I'm really just not like overblowing these statements or misquoting or anything like that. You can go watch the film and she says these things. Like these come out of her mouth. We assume female chickens are female because they lay eggs. Bro, what? Oh my goodness. And the nail on the coffin in this interview is when he brought up drugs that are used as puberty blockers for kids who are identifying as etc etc. Now, one of the drugs that she brought out was Lupron. And Lupron is the same drug that is used to chemically castrate pedophiles. And they give Lupron to kids. And the moment he asked her about Lupron and chemical castration of kids, was her immediate response. I think, well, I don't remember her exact words, but basically she wanted to end the interview. She said that it's taking it a direction that wasn't comfortable with. So instead of answering the question, she avoids the question. And then when Matt Walsh asks more about Lupron and chemical castration and the drug that is given to kids, she says there's context of caring for children in regards to giving them Lupron. What context is there in terms of giving kids Lupron for chemical castration? Seems like it's a very harmful drug, and there's more information about Lupron in other interviews that we're going to go over, but that's the pediatrician. As you can tell, she's an advocate for kids choosing their own gender identity. Again, I have a big problem with that, but we move forward. We keep on going. Matt Walsh also asked a lot of people in the crowd, a lot of random people, a bunch of different things in regards to gender identity. Well, the big question is, what is a woman? Most people could not disagree or chose not to answer the question directly. A lot of them said, "I don't know." When a lot of people that were given this question, they were like, I don't know what a woman is. It's an identity. You can be a lot of different things. Nobody gave a straightforward answer, and that was purely because they don't want to be canceled. They don't want to be ostracized on social media. For me personally, I don't care. In terms of gender identity, like gender as sex at this point in time in our society is two different things. But a woman, in terms of sex, is very simple to answer. Not a complicated question, right? So a lot of people were asked, a lot of people didn't answer. Next interview is a gender professor. And this professor was asked about the differences between sex and gender. Now, this gender professor teaches gender ideology to college students. So, if that's their profession, by all means, they're adults, they're in college. They can choose what they want and what they do not want to learn. Now, this professor dives into sex and gender, and they actually give some legit explanations. Sex refers to biological characteristics. Fair enough. I think that's something we all can agree on. Gender is a bunch of social characteristics. Okay, very interesting. So that is like the consolidated definition that gender professor gave for these two terms. Now, one quote that was very interesting that the gender professor did say is, if someone tells you who you are or who they are, you should believe them. See, this is where we get into the weeds of statements that don't make sense. Because by this statement and the logic behind this statement, if I called myself a white German dude, based on the logic of the statement, you are not allowed to question me and you should outright believe me. Because I told you who I identify as. That's why when it comes to logic and statements and certain things that is put out there, you need to have some logical background that you can fall back upon, where the precedent is set and cannot be extended to some outlandish perspective. Based on the statement itself, there's a lot of ways you can take this statement and it can get pretty dumb very fast. Okay, so then Matt Walsh begins asking the question of what is a woman, and very similar to a lot of different interviews, the professor starts feeling uncomfortable, saying that he did not like the language that is given, and threatens to leave the interview the moment he was asked about what is a woman. He said he didn't like the word truth. Matt Walsh referred to truth in terms of the outright reality we currently see. We're not going to the fourth dimension, fifth dimension. In terms of, for example, this in reality is a water bottle. So that is what Matt Walsh was referring to in the term truth. The gender professor did not like the word truth when it comes to describing what is a woman, threatens to leave the interview. Another thing that was said is human beings can be mistaken about their identity. I believe this is something Matt Walsh has said, and this is something that I very much agree with in terms of identity. I feel like when he asked this or said the statement, the gender professor was kind of flabbergasted, so to speak. And that is true. A lot of people can be mistaken about their identity because of the fluidity of identity itself. You don't know who you are truly until you experience life to its fullest, right? That's why you're not considered a true adult until like 18, 21. And in terms of maturity of your body, that doesn't really happen until like 25 if you're a male, right? Identity, people go to college and constantly figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. For me personally, if I had an option, I would do this podcast for the rest of my life. But people take a while before they find out who they are and what they want to do. What makes them them, what makes them particularly who they specifically identify as. It's more than physical characteristics. It's beyond that in terms of your own thought processes and social interactions. And that's a very powerful statement in regards to that. Again, every time he asked the question, or every time he asks about what is a woman, the gender professor stops really trying to combat, and all he keeps saying is, why do you ask that question? This is a defense mechanism that people use in terms of a debate. When they're given a point or a question in regards to anything specific, instead of answering the point or question or replying to the point or question that has been asked of them or told to them, they start asking questions about the question or statement that was asked or said. That is a manipulative debate strategy that people do when they do not want to answer something. So you have one or two choices after this is done. One, you say what you said again and say, answer the damn question, or two, give up. And for the most part, people who do that hope you just give up. And that is the reality of debating in general, right? Some knowledge for you guys out there, to be honest. I refuse to answer the question. Matt Walsh kept on asking, what is a woman? I think one of the definitions the gender professor gave is that he said, well, someone who identifies as a woman. Then he asks, is that, and then he asks again, what is that? What is a woman? And again, he says, someone who identifies as a woman. And he brought up it being a circular definition. If you don't know what a circular definition is, it's when you use the word to explain what you're trying to define. It's an absolute idiotic way to do it, but again, it's a way to not answer the question. So that's basically what it is. He also brought up the fact that he called Matt Walsh an essentialist. I look up what essentialist is, and this is the definition: a belief that things have a set of characteristics which makes them what they are, and that the task of science and philosophy is their discovery and expression, the doctrine that essence is prior to existence. So he called Matt Walsh an essentialist because of him trying to find out a definition of what is a woman. And it is what it is. Based off the definition, being essentialist isn't inherently bad. It's just a term. I guess he's trying to use it to make it sound like it's bad, okay? All right. Next interview, as you guys can tell, that's the person that was on the pro-transgenderism side of the spectrum. Now we got a psychologist here, a person who goes deep into, how kids and adults think about transgenderism. So this psychology, other than the other situations where a lot of them were kind of expressionary, emotional responses in terms of the gender professor, the pediatrician, and the surgeon, the psychologist brought out actual numbers and statistics to back up the claims that they were trying to make, which I do appreciate. Now, one of the first things that was mentioned in regards to transgenderism is gender dysphoria. Obviously, this is the mental illness that people have in regards to having a feeling that you are the wrong gender. It's a medical disorder, something that the surgeon did not want to acknowledge, so to speak. Now, based on the statistic that was given to us by the psychologist, they said 1 in 30,000 to 1 in 10,000 people have gender dysphoria, or someone has encountered someone who has gender dysphoria. And like I said, it's something in regards to the discomfort with your own biological sex. Okay, now they also said something, the psychologist also said something, is that this has nothing to do with the current trend of kids coming out. Meaning, a lot of the people who are transgender or identify as transgender do not have gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is a very particular mental illness for certain people, but in this current society, a lot of them do not have, or some of them do not have. I don't know the exact statistic, but some of them do not have gender dysphoria. Very interesting, something to point out, whether that's probably a good or bad thing. I don't know how you guys want to kind of interpret that. Obviously, sex is biology. So yeah, the psychologist gave a definition of sex and gender. Like I said, I read off the definition from the gender professor. The psychologist said sex is biology. Makes sense, right? Very exact same thing that the gender professor said. In terms of gender, they said a gender is the perception, feeling, experience, and identity of one of a particular gender. So I guess similar to social characteristics is how the gender professor kind of defined it. So a little bit more definitive in terms of the explanation. So very similar in terms of their acknowledgement of what sex versus gender is from the psychology. Now, when Matt Walsh asked about truth, because he also asked the psychologist about truth, the psychologist answered the question saying there is one truth, there is one reality, whereas the gender professor refused to acknowledge there is one truth. They constantly indicated that there is multiple truths per person, whereas the psychologist said, no, there's only one reality. There's one truth. So the differences there is very apparent right off the bat. So the psychologist went deeper in terms of the potential issues in regards to transgenderism with the current wave of kids and growing up specifically. They said that there are now children's books that that was given to Matt Walsh. There's a children book that was okay for 10 and up. So this is for like all like kids in general. And the children's book were talked about gender, and it had pictures of a adult male and an adult female having sex, like cartoon pictures of this. This is for 10 and up, meaning that they're trying to teach kids about sex at a younger and younger age. Not good. Trust me, it's not a good thing. I don't know if anybody disagrees, but I personally think that is not a good thing. Now, what was really interesting about this interview is she talked about the two pioneers of gender ideology and the transgender movement. The two pioneers, and the basically biography of these two individuals is shocking. This is shocking information. So the first person was named Kinsey. I forgot what his first name is, but he was known as Kinsey. He was known as a social reformer. One of the premises that he kind of established or kind of noted for himself is that he said that children are sexual from birth. You think that's as bad as it's going to get? It's going to get worse. He said children are, this is the words from the psychologist. Keep in mind, the psychologist. He said children are sexual from birth. So the moment they are born, they're immediately sexual. He also noted that true happiness is from perverse sexual experience. I'm enunciating for you guys to hear exactly what this guy was on. And it doesn't get better. It gets worse. Matter of fact, this dude, Kinsey, performed pedophilic experiments on kids and babies. Matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, matter of fact, he has a whole data book of orgasms from babies to adults and how they experienced it, when they experienced it, how long it took. He has a data book of it. A data book, people. And apparently this man is one of the pioneers of this movement. Apparently his teachings are taught and glorified from people that are supporting the cause of transgenderism and gender ideology. Apparently, again, these are words from the psychologist. This dude was an absolute sicko. If I met him, I'll beat the out, bro. Oh my god, that is bro. It's blows my mind how horrible of a person this guy was. And this is the first person, okay? There's a second person. His name was John Money. Kinsey's social reform and a lot of things was a very big pioneer situation. John Money was specifically the person who coined the phrase gender ideology, gender identity, and gender roles. Now, he noted that babies are gender neutral at birth, which is not true, but because they either have a, male gametes or female gametes, right? Now, he conducted an experiment. This is sick. This is horrible. But you guys need to learn. You guys need to hear this information because this is the stuff that was in the documentary. If you don't plan to watch the documentary, at the bare minimum, you can learn about this situation. So, John Money conducted an experiment. There was these two twin boys. These twin boys, back a long time ago, there was problems with the circumcision of one of the boys. And one of the boys, his male part was heavily damaged, and I think it was cut off completely to kind of save his life, I believe. On the other baby, they didn't do the circumcision because they did not want the same thing happening to him. So he got it cleared from the parents to conduct an experiment on these twin boys. And the experiment went as follows to confirm his premise of gender ideology and gender roles and all that stuff. The boy that didn't get the circumcision lived as a boy. The other boy who had the procedure because of the circumcision was raised as a girl. There are twin boys. One was raised as a normal boy, the other was raised as a girl. Now, he did multiple experiments on these two twins as they grew up. He said, based on the experiments, he did grotesque experiments, including making the twin boy and the other boy that was raised as a girl perform sexual acts on each other. This was part of his experiments to prove his theory. He made them perform sexual acts. These two twins. It's crazy. I know, right? It's crazy. And after all the experimentation, he found out that his whole theory was absolutely wrong. Matter of fact, it didn't work at all. Matter of fact, the boy who had his thing burnt off and cut off, unfortunately, his name is David. Matter of fact, it didn't work so much that he transitioned back to being a boy because he could not live as a girl. No matter how he grew up, no matter how they treated him, he himself did not feel like a girl because he was a boy at birth. So it did not prove his theory at all. To go further, the traumatic experience that was both on both twin boys was so traumatic that his brother, David's brother, who didn't have the circumcision, committed a drug overdose, and David, a few years after, committed suicide. But apparently, John Money's doctrine is the basis of gender ideology. It's crazy. It's absolutely, utterly crazy considering who these two people are, John Money and Kinsey. Two horrible human beings, if they lived in the current society, would be burned at the stake. But their ideals perpetuate this movement. But nobody wants to acknowledge that, right? Nobody wants to acknowledge that. All right, so we move on to another interview regarding a female athlete. Now, this one was obviously not as statistically founded as the psychologist or the surgeon or whatever. You know, it didn't have the medical background. This is a personal experience type of interview. So there's a female athlete. She was pretty successful in what she did. Now, one of the years in, I believe, high school, there was two transgender females that joined her team. These two transgender females completely dusted her and the entire team. She said they beat them by like 20 meters. This female athlete also noted that these two athletes won all the events that they participated in and took all the opportunity. Matter of fact, the female athlete didn't qualify for certain things because they went to these two transgender athletes. And she said she had a feeling of inadequacy because she knew that no matter what she did, she could never be better than those two transgender males. Or transgender females, sorry. This is a personal experience from a female athlete. Talking about the current movement of trans females and female sports. Now there's more regards to that. He also did an interview with someone from the National Center for Transgender, I believe. I didn't get the whole name. And they also talked about female athletes and trans female athletes. Now, they said that the Connecticut athlete situation was an exception to the situation. They noted that there's a lot of transgender females that are not winning everything and being extremely impressive and all that. Now, what was very interesting in this situation is he let the person talk, but then in the documentary, in the foreground, he had multiple examples of trans female athletes absolutely dominating the competition, winning everything, and completely dusting every female. These are the sports that I saw when he was putting out the clips: volleyball, track, combat sports like the UFC, rugby, swimming, and weightlifting were some of the examples where there was transgender females absolutely dominating the females. But this person said, "Oh yeah, that doesn't really happen." Even the surgeon was like, "Oh yeah, that doesn't really happen." Come on. Come on. At least recognize the aspect of how a biological male would have an advantage. At least do that. But they went a step further and say it doesn't happen at all. And we also got an interview from the teammate of Leah Thomas. If you don't know who Leah Thomas is, she is a transgender female who participated in a swimming event, completely destroying the rest of the team. Like, she beat them by a mile, basically. And this was one of her teammates talking about her experience competing against Leah Thomas. She said that she was told, this teammate, she was told, and they actually like altered her voice and blacked out her face so she didn't get identified from the documentary. Now, she was told from other people on that was supporting Leah Thomas and part of the team and like part of the organization of like the NCAA and the school and whatnot. She said if she speaks against Leah Thomas in any way, like if she doesn't outright support Leah Thomas, she was called transphobic by her peers. She also noted that there was a psychologist who was giving teachings and lessons to all the athletes who did not agree with Leah Thomas being on her team. And the final thing she said is that if she spoke out against Leah Thomas in any way, she was afraid her life would be over on like social media, on the media, and people would constantly come after her or ruin her entire career. Okay, it just tells you like even if you disagree, you can disagree and have it be like friendly, right? It can be civil if you disagree, but even if you disagree, the people on the on the other side, they are very aggressive, violent, and willing to ruin everything about you because you disagree. Lack of freedom of speech, censorship, sounds like things that would be involved in some type of tyrannical society. Am I wrong? All right. With that said, if you guys don't remember, he also showed a video of the woman's bath situation. And the woman's bath situation where a woman went to a spa, I think it was like an Asian spa situation, and she was calling out the staff because a transgender female went in the woman's bath with all these females and especially young girls, and the transgender female still had all the anatomy and was just flopping it all over the place. And she was pissed because her daughters had to witness this transgender female do this. Apparently, this transgender female was also, let me be very clear about this, who this person was. A 52-year-old transgender woman who was a registered sex offender. But people were trying to come at the woman saying, hey, man, you can't tell her she can't be in there. Bruh. It's getting dicey because trust me, if I had a daughter, she ain't seen that either. You feel me? She ain't seen that either. So, in response to this situation, there was a interview with the I think representative of California, I think Rep Mark, congressperson of course, and there was an interview. This was a very short interview. Let's discuss it. They discussed the Equality Act that was amended to kind of include the LGBTQ community. And what Matt Walsh brought up to this representative is public accommodation. He was asked a question about bathrooms and women not being happy about men being in bathrooms. And when the question was asked, I kid you not, the representative did not answer the question. Matter of fact, he paused for a long period of time, didn't say a single word, and then made a romanticized reply, not saying a single thing, and then got up and left the interview. That's three examples of credible individuals asking a very simple question and leaves the interview or threatens to leave the interview. It's very telling. It's very telling. And my nose is very itchy. Sorry about that. It's very telling. It's very, very telling. But Matt Walsh did a few more talks with random people on the streets. Talked to with one person. They said only women know what women are. And Matt Walsh replied, "Are you a cat? Can you tell me what a cat is?" The person just then left the interview. The fourth example, the person was like, "Okay, I don't want to respond to that. I'm leaving the interview." Fourth example. He also went to a women's march, also asking people what is a woman. Was for the most part very civil, wasn't really being any aggressive with his tone or anything, just asking a question about what is a woman. And in that march, some people shoved him, started chanting that he was an asshole, and nobody at the women's march answered the question, what is a woman? I think you're seeing the theme about a lot of these situations that was very apparent in the documentary. And of course, he went to Africa, and I'm not going to go over Africa because it's a completely different culture, but it sets in the idea of gender ideology is not universal, not around the world. Not everybody believes. This tribe in Africa was very simple in terms of what a man and woman is. Women have babies, men help make babies and provide for the family. Like, that's basically what they said in regards to a man and woman's role. They didn't acknowledge gender ideology. They didn't acknowledge transgenderism. It just wasn't a thing for this African tribe. It just wasn't. So it's not a universal term. It's not something that applies to all human beings. It's mostly a term just for Western cultures. Something that was newly created from two people who are scumbags. I'm just saying. And I'm not okay, I want people to listen to the entire episode because it may sound like I'm trying to come for transgender people. I'll give my full opinions about transgenderism and my full thoughts about it at the end. I'll give my honest opinion about it. I'm just relaying what I learned in the documentary and responding with that knowledge. But I have my own opinions. Trust me, I have my own opinions. All right. So with that said, we continue to dive into this. And another highlight interview was with the founder of Trey Voices, who's actually a transgender male. They transitioned from a female to a male. And this organization, which is known as Trey Voices, that this person founded, is an organization that helps young people who struggle with gender dysphoria. And it's also noted that despite death threats upon this person who's part of the LGBTQ community, technically because they're a transgender male, was receiving death threats, but he continues on his endeavor and tries to help these kids understand gender dysphoria and transitioning and the truth behind what's going on. So, a few very interesting points that was brought up in this interview with this person is they brought up how if someone, this is said multiple times, of how innately a male is a male and a female is a female. That's unarguable in terms of sex, right? Because if you dig up someone's bones from 10,000 years from now, when they dig up the bones, they're gonna look at the bones and go this is a female. They don't care about your identity, they don't care about your ideology, they don't care about anything. This is a female. And they're gonna go by the biology, the bones. You feel me? Yes, sir. A few other things that was mentioned, apparently from the founder, I forgot their name, unfortunately, but they said in terms of their transition, a few of the things happened to them. They have multiple medical conditions because of the transition. He said that he won't live very long and gets infections frequently because of the gender transition. Purely because of the transition. This is the stuff that's happening to him. He also noted that the medical transition is not even a proven science yet. it's still experimental. This was said. And that all studies of transitioning that help kids have been redacted, meaning that there's no proven cases that this is a successful procedure in terms of helping kids. The only study that covered trans people in a long period of time indicated that they become more suicidal after the transition. So this does not help based on this study. There are 5 children's hospitals also, and they noted this very interesting premise in this particular interview of how these pharmaceutical companies are banking off of kids. Matter of fact, from these 5 children's hospitals that do these transitions to kids, they make $70,000 a pop, even though there's a 70+% chance there's a complication in the procedure. So about a 70% chance that there's going to be some medical issue that happens to the kid. But they still do it. They still make bank. Matter of fact, they generate about $1.3 million for pharma for each kid. Is that what pharma? Is that pharma? I'm reading my own text and I don't even know what I said here. But $1.3 million for pharma for each kid. $70,000 a pop, $1.3 million in terms of, money. Obviously, they also noted the aspect of puberty and how puberty blockers have not been proven to help and not been proven to pause puberty. That has never been proven. So yeah, there's no studies to confirm that idea that you can just stop puberty. Lupron, let's bring that back up again. The chemical castration drug. Apparently in 2003, Lupron was deemed a criminal enterprise by the U.S. government. And it was fined more than any other pharmaceutical company at that time. So it has a bad history in terms of its past dealings. And like I said, it chemically castrates pedophiles. It's used on kids. And in regards to, this entire situation, despite everything they said, like you said, it causes more suicide after transition. So pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money from transgender transitions for kids. These drugs are very damaging to kids and does not benefit them in any way. That just damages their bodies innately. One thing I didn't bring up, I believe, in regards to the psychologist, sorry, let me check this again, is that the psychologist noted that there was an example of a 14-year-old who was put on puberty blockers, and then when she decided she didn't want to do it anymore, afterwards she got osteoporosis, which is a disease that old women have. So yeah, the entire premise that puberty blockers and hormone and these drugs help and pause puberty is completely false. That's been completely debunked. Now, I want you guys to hear a personal experience of a parent in regards to dealing with this situation. This is a circumstance that happened in Canada. And a lot of the news I've been hearing about Canada recently has made me very suspect about the country. It's supposed to be the nice country, but it's been very suspect as of recently. So this random caller was calling from Canada. He was actually out on bail in Canada when this conversation was happening. And he can't go anywhere from the British Columbia of Canada. Now, this was a father. In 2018, this father was informed that his daughter was taking hormone blocking drugs, or was trying to take hormone blocking drugs in the hospital. So he was informed about this from the hospital while they're already there thinking about doing it. He was not told about it prior. And apparently, according to a recent Canadian law, doctors can administrate these hormone blocking drugs to children without parental consent. So even if you say, in Canada, even if you say, No, I'm not letting my kid have hormone blocking drugs. The government could basically say, I don't give a damn what you say, and do it anyway. How is that possible? I don't even understand that. Matter of fact, this situation went to court in regards to the father, the hospital, and the daughter. And when he in regards to the situation, when he spoke out about it, he got arrested because he said, no, my daughter can't do that. And he lost the trial, was fined $30,000 because he misgendered his 13-year-old daughter. $30,000. And matter of fact, it's considered by law in Canada that misgendering anybody is a criminal offense. That's freedom of speech. That is censorship. You can't say certain things based on Canadian law. That's kind of crazy. That is kind of crazy. So the dad lost the court case, of course. Like I said, he was out on bail. And they went through the procedure, and his daughter was given the hormone blocking drugs. So he lost his daughter, unfortunately, and the daughter did whatever she wanted. The father obviously did not want to lose his daughter, but he doesn't regret what he did, because at the end of the day, he indicated that his daughter could never say he didn't care, because he did care about her health. He did care about her well-being. I don't know their personal relationship, so I can't really speak on that. But this situation is kind of crazy, in my personal opinion. So yeah, that's a personal experience with a father in Canada. That is not all that she wrote, ladies and gentlemen. There is more interview. This was an hour and a half plus interview, so there's a lot of content to speak on. Sorry, a lot of things to talk about because there's a lot of very interesting information. So the next interview was with a clinical supervisor. They said in a lot of cases in regards to whether a mother and a father disagreeing with whether or not this kid should take hormone drugs or do a gender transition, she said more times than not, the person who affirms the transition and the drugs wins the court case. So apparently it's more common or more accepted for the kid to commit these acts and transitions versus not do it based on the parent's perspective. Hopefully that makes sense. And the clinical supervisor also noted that, also keep in mind, she said that her peers won't talk to her about this stuff because, it's a very controversial topic, of course. She said that no one is explaining the effects of hormone blockers and surgeries to kids. They're not diving into how impactful this could have on the rest of their life. She also noted that there was an example of kids in schools now, if they identify as animals, that it's part of the LGBTQ queer community, and because it is, teachers are not allowed to question whether or not of them being animals. If the kid says I'm an animal, the teacher can't say no, you're not. The teacher can't question it at all. So these kids are allowed to be animals in school by law, for some places anyway. And then there was an interview with a person who was in their 20s by Matt Walsh, and they did the interview with this person. She identified as a trans woman wolf person, and this is how she got her identification. She was watching anime, saw a wolf, identified as a wolf. It's that easy. This is what I'm talking about in terms of kids not being allowed to choose their identity. They can watch one anime and think about, oh yeah, I'm that now. So ever since then, she identified as a trans woman and a wolf. And she says she can communicate to wolves somehow. And it's just crazy to me. Because now you can't say kids don't think like that. Now they're going to grow up thinking they're an animal. You can't talk about that. She also kind of confirms the aspect that there's no research on long-term hormone use. I'd say this current wave of kids that are getting these drugs are like the experimental phase. Like they are the experiment. They are the first case scenarios, basically. And she said that 10 years of hormone use, from what she knows, can give cancer. So, not great, right? A lot of information, a lot of interviews I already talked about. Bro, there's even more information. Matt Walsh talked to Jordan Peterson. One very important thing that he noted is that therapist's job is not to affirm anything, especially, or not especially, but anything in terms of ideologies. They're there to listen and understand, but they're not there to affirm any ideology, right? That's not a job of a therapist. Another person who wrote a book about the end of gender, they talked about how it's impossible to do good research nowadays in regards to gender because of all the activists. She talked about the ugly history of researchers and trans activists, and that no one cares about the safety of women and girls. Nobody's trying to protect women in female sports because, obviously there's trans females in the sport. And she said she wouldn't be surprised in a couple of years if there's no women's sports at all because trans females take over. All right. So basically, biological men take over the entire sports industry. He also spoke with another person who's also Arthur. He talked about how in our current society there's an idea that I am my feelings, how emotion is carrying the way I think, the pursuit of personal happiness, and that if anybody interferes with my feelings, that they are bad people. And it's just pushing a way of thinking purely based off of emotion with no logic at all, is what this person basically indicated. And there's a lot of other people talking about the situations. There's in terms of the new trend of people who are identifying, of course. Even a person who transitioned was talking about this situation, and they referred to how in a few weeks of being an ally, she then identified as transgender. So the moment she felt like she was an ally of the LGBTQ community and got into the space, she then felt transgender after kind of being indoctrinated. Because a lot of these situations that was explained in this documentary, a lot of people who are doing this are people who are kind of ostracized in their current community, right? In high school, for example, there's the jocks, there's the smart kids or rich kids or the video game nerds, but there are some people who feel ostracized from all of that. They don't have anywhere to belong, so they turn into the internet. They turn to other people who are also ostracized, and a lot of these people turn to this type of community with the LGBTQ plus movement, and they start identifying with that movement almost immediately, right? It gives them somewhere to belong. It gives them some people to belong to, regardless if it's right or wrong. It just gives them some place to be. And that's also attributed to this current culture in our society of, the mental illness and how kids are getting more and more depressed, committing more and more suicide, that we need to fix in America as a whole, personally. So a lot of people identify as different things. There's a person who's identified as teacher / Fambrina, and another person who identified as a demon, apparently. So people are identifying as whatever they want. Kids are becoming younger and younger and transitioning from this because of the influence of social media, TikTok, YouTube, all that stuff. And at the end of the day, this is just not realistic. This is what was said. It's not realistic asking permanent health effects on children, like asking them to make permanent effects on their body to children, giving them the ability to choose these monumental decisions. They are children. They shouldn't make decisions on anything. They are kids, but they're making these huge choices. And this person, a transgender female, was saying this. Again, it's crazy. He also did an interview with a teacher. He lost a job when he spoke out against this, teaching kids this type of thinking. People were talking about how in the board was talking about how sexual assault does not happen in bathrooms, and there's outright news reports of sexual assault happening in bathrooms when transgender females are going into female bathrooms and committing heinous acts. Matter of fact, Matt Walsh went to a school board and called a lot of the school board out in a situation that happened. I don't know if it was recently, but in the last couple of years. Matter of fact, he also created a whole children's book for the documentary called Johnny the Walrus, and he talked about how Johnny identified as a walrus, and that I guess his entire premise was to kind of tell you how this is kind of an accepted view now. Matter of fact, I'm not sure if you guys seen. He went on Dr. Phil's show, talked about transgenderism. Pretty, it got a little heated, but for the most part, pretty civil. It seems like everything was civil. A couple of days later, a few people on the panel was complaining about emotional damage, and the show was taken off of CBS and Hulu. Again, censorship. Again, attacking freedom of speech. Just saying. So, no one could define what is a woman. And then at the end of the episode, or the end of the documentary, he asked his wife, and his wife responded, adult human female. And that is seen. So a lot of information was told upon you that I learned, that I just told you. If you want to watch the full documentary, by all means, you can watch it on the Daily Wire. But I just wanted to give my full thoughts about the podcast and a lot of the interesting information that I did learn from it. Now, here is the segment that I'm going to put on YouTube in terms of what is a woman. This will be my What is a Woman full documentary review. I'll make it pretty brief. So, in my personal opinion, in terms of the documentary, I thought it was very well done. I thought the people who attacked the documentary or trying to censor the documentary are pretty bad people. I think people should be allowed to express anything in terms of, media. I mean, obviously, if it's something that's innately grotesque, like certain things on the dark web, you don't want to show that. But this was just conversations. You can't censor conversations about, issues that's going on in the world, right? So I thought that was pretty weird. The interviews themselves would flowed very well. Like I said in the beginning of the episode, Matt Walsh was very calm, collected, and it gave him the opportunity to ask very hard-hitting questions and got a lot of no answers from a lot of people on the other side. A lot of them left the interview, was threatening to leave the interview, did not answer the question. Very apparent. One thing that was very noticeable was the statistics, the facts that was brought up. How the people who kind of founded the ideology are true scumbags. How the statistics of suicide goes up after transitioning. How the drugs that are used are horrible drugs that should not be used on kids. Matter of fact, there's no proof that any of the stuff that they're doing now to kids helps kids from the documentary. And matter of fact, all the people we interviewed never gave any proof that this stuff exists and this stuff helps. They just gave emotional responses for the most part. Matter of fact, they denied a lot of the situations that's happening in current society with transgender females potentially going into bathrooms and being very grotesque, with teachers taking kids or 16-year-olds kids to drag shows and showing them very sexual things in the drag shows, where people who are also, a lot of them can be sexual offenders and pedophiles there as well. They completely denied the aspect of transgender females dominating female sports. They completely denied so many aspects of the wrongness of the situation that's going on in society. Completely denied it. At the very least, if you're to deny it, add something to it, discredit it somehow, but they completely refuse to add any substance. That is what the documentary showed me today. And the numerous amount of examples of very inappropriate and very detrimental things that are happening to our kids, that are happening to our society as a whole, that we should not allow, right? Now, here's my personal opinion in regards to transgenderism that I'm going to speak about once right now. Personally, for me, I'm not with Matt Walsh or Ben Shapiro in terms of you're not allowed to be transgender. I do accept at this point it's pretty much intertwined with society, and to go backwards will be impossible. Sex and gender are two different things now. You can't really speak on it. Nobody can argue against sex. That would be impossible. People who say there's multiple spectrums of gender, I mean, at that point, that fluidity is actually more damaging. If you want to say gender is a social construct that refers to a specific characteristics of a male or female, by all means. Everything in between, that's just stuff in between. There's just like, make it very simple. You don't need to make it complicated so you can just be whatever you want. That's when it gets dangerous again, when you start making things be anything, because people will start identifying as animals, and people will start identifying as disabled, people will start identifying as different races. I need some side of precedent. I need some type of logic so people can have something to fall back on, so it doesn't get out of hand. Because the people on the other side that disagrees with the idea of transgenderism, they'll look at it, they have facts and statistics and logic to back up their claims, but you do not. It's all feeling and angriness for the most part, right? But as I said, in terms of transgenderism, it's pretty much intertwined with society. Male sex, female sex is a thing. Gender, there can be gender, male gender in terms of your male social characteristics, female gender in terms of female characteristics. Everything in between that is just things that people make up. Like, it's, I don't know what else you can be in terms of other social characteristics. No other social characteristic has been established, but I'm fine with you being a they, them, he, him, she, her. I will never not call you your gender. I mean, if I make a mistake, I make a mistake, but I'm not one to kind of piss off people just to piss off people. Like, if you want to live your life, as I said before, if you're an adult, live your life. I don't care. It doesn't affect me personally, but I am gonna, if we're talking about facts, I'm gonna bring up facts. I'm not gonna accept your emotion just because you want to accept me. I will, if we need to bring up facts, I'll bring up facts. Now, in terms of the kids, I ain't with teaching kids this, though. Let's keep it a buck. I'm not with teaching kids this. Kids should have the open space to learn about the world in general. Again, apologize for scratching my nose constantly. For some reason, just itched the entire episode. But yeah, I'm not with teaching kids this type of stuff. I prefer kids to just learn about life, learn about what it takes to be an adult, and that's it. If innately they feel that they're not who they're supposed to be as an adult, they can make their own decisions. But as a kid, they cannot make their own decisions. They cannot. And it's not a teacher's job, it's not a doctor's job to tell them how they should think. It's the parent's job. Even if the parent does something I disagree with, it's the parent's job. I can't do anything about that. Once they become an adult and learn about the world a little bit more and want to change, give them the ability. But you can't tell a parent how they can parent. You just can't. It's impossible. But personally, like I said, I'm personally fine with it in terms of, the transgender people, and I mean, if we're keeping a buck, there's a lot of transgender males that look better than normal males. There's a lot of transgender females that look pretty good. Like, if we're keeping a buck, like a lot of them, a good number of them intertwine with society perfectly fine. It's just when we go to these crazy extents, when we don't have a foundational basis, that it gets weird. Because then if we start making it all emotion, if we start just extending the definitions, at that point we allow crazy things like transableism, like trans species, like transracialism. We need a basis. Transgender females, transgender males are in society today, but I need you people who are on the other side to recognize this is not good for kids. I need you to recognize the actualities of our current society. And a lot of them actually do recognize this stuff, but what's really annoying, it's the people that don't want to offend them so much that they cloud their judgment. It's just the people who are not even in that community that are the worst ones sometimes. It's frustrating. You're not even in the community, but you're the loudest one. Like, it's absolutely frustrating. So I'm not with Matt Walsh. I'm not with Ben Shapiro. I will never deny you your existence. I don't mind if you're trans female, trans male. I don't mind if you're gay, lesbian, bisexual. But I definitely want to cap it at some point too, because, hey man, we're gonna get ridiculous. It's pretty ridiculous currently in society. If this keeps on going that way, our society's over. Because at the end of the day, it's very clear: men, female are needed to for the human race to continue. Male gametes, female gametes make babies. It's not complicated. We can't have it where men and females do not exist. Like, that is the structure of humanity. Men, female, make babies. We need, in terms of our culture, we should dive into that eventually, but that is my official review. I very much liked the documentary. I thought it was very informative. I thought it was very interesting. Although I don't agree with all the views in terms of transgender people, I kind of let them live their way they're living. There is a cap to it, and there are things that you guys extenuate way too far. There are things that it's very harmful. I don't see why there can't be a transgender bathroom. I don't see why there can't be transgender sports. Like, it's not discrimination. It's, this is who you are. If you are transgender, this is who you are. So it's just like, how females play with females, males play with males, teens play with teens, kids play with kids, people who are disabled play with people who are disabled. I don't see anything wrong with it personally. If you can argue against me, if you think I'm wrong, please let me know. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of The Trend. A very interesting episode. A lot of very interesting information that was learned. People may hate me for this episode and they call me transphobic. It is what it is. I have no problem with trans people by any means. I, for the most part, live your life. But the moment it becomes detrimental to society, I'm going to call it out. Best believe. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.